The night sky above the alien planet was filled with strange colors. Red and blue clouds swirled together, glowing like fire and ice. John, a human explorer, stepped carefully through the dark valley. He had traveled far from his ship, searching for something rare, something hidden. Rumors said this world kept secrets, secrets no one should ever touch. The wind howled against the black rocks, carrying a sound that was not natural. It was like a whisper, faint but sharp, calling his name even though no one should know it. John gripped the small light in his hand and moved forward. His heart was steady, but his mind was filled with unease. Why did it feel like someone was waiting for him here, in this lonely place? At the end of the valley stood a massive cave. The entrance looked like the open mouth of a beast, jagged and hungry. Inside, faint lights flickered, as if something alive was breathing in the dark. John took a deep breath and stepped inside. The air grew colder, and the walls seemed to close in around him. Every step echoed like a warning, but still he pushed on. Then he saw her, a figure in the shadows, chained to the wall with silver cuffs that glowed faintly. Her body was tall and graceful, not human, yet strangely beautiful. Her skin shimmered under the dim light, pale with a touch of silver. Her hair floated softly, as if moved by an invisible wind. But it was her eyes that caught him, eyes that glowed faintly even in the dark. She turned her face quickly away, covering herself with her hand. Her voice broke the silence, soft yet filled with fear. "Don't stare at me, human. I can't bear it," she whispered. John froze, his light trembling in his hand. The words were not of anger, but of sorrow. It was as if she had carried that fear for many years. "Who are you?" John asked, his voice cautious. The woman did not answer, only pulling harder at her chains. The sound of metal rang through the cave, sharp and desperate. She shook her head, refusing to meet his eyes. "You should leave before it destroys you," she said, her tone shaking. John felt a chill crawl down his back. What was she hiding, and why was she afraid of being seen? The cave trembled lightly, as if the planet itself reacted to her words. John tried to step closer, but she flinched, her body tense. He raised his hand slowly, showing he meant no harm. "I don't want to hurt you," he said gently. Still, she kept her face hidden, her voice breaking like a fragile glass. "You don't understand. My eyes are cursed. My gaze brings only terror. If you look too long, you will lose yourself." John's breath caught in his throat. Was it true, or only a story made to keep strangers away? The explorer inside him wanted to believe it was only fear, only legend. But deep in his heart, he knew this was different. This was not a normal encounter. This was something beyond human knowledge. The air grew heavy. The shadows around her seemed to move like smoke. John felt his chest tighten, as if unseen hands pressed against him. Still, he refused to turn away. Something about her voice pulled him closer. Not anger, not hatred, but pain and loneliness. A prisoner not of chains alone, but of her own existence. Finally, she risked a glance, her glowing eyes meeting his for the first time. It was only for a second, but John's mind filled with flashes, visions of war, broken cities, and screams. He staggered back, gasping for air, the light falling from his hand. The visions vanished as quickly as they came. She had turned away again, covering her face, her body trembling like a fragile bird. "I warned you," she whispered, tears shining in her voice. "Now you know why they keep me here." John leaned against the cave wall, his heart racing. The fear was real, but so was something else, something hidden beneath her curse. He saw not a monster, but someone trapped, broken, and afraid. For the first time, he felt a strange pull inside him, not of terror, but of compassion. He stepped forward again, his voice steady. "I am not leaving you here," he said firmly. The words echoed in the dark cave, stronger than the chains around her. The alien woman trembled, unable to believe. Her whole life, people had only looked at her with fear. But this human's voice was different. It carried no judgment, no disgust, only determination. Her lips parted, her whisper softer now, almost fragile. Then you are a fool, human, but perhaps the only fool I have ever wanted to believe. And in that moment, the cave no longer felt empty. The air no longer felt dead. Two strangers stood in the shadows, bound by fear, pain, and a fragile spark of hope. The encounter had begun, but it was only the first step into something much greater. The cave was silent after her whisper. John stood frozen, his chest rising and falling quickly, the vision still burning in his mind. But the woman, chained to the wall, refused to look at him again. Her silver cuffs glowed faintly in the darkness, humming with strange energy. It was not simple metal. John could feel it. It was alive with power. He stepped closer, and the air around him grew colder. Every inch felt heavier, as if the cave itself wanted to push him back. Still, he forced himself to keep moving. The woman shook her head, her voice sharp but broken. You should not be here, human. They will return soon, and if they see you, they will kill you without mercy. Who are they? John asked, his voice steady but curious. She hesitated, then whispered, My own people. Her words cut through the air like a knife. John blinked, confused. Your people keep you like this? Her chains rattled as she tried to hide her face again. They call me cursed, dangerous, unworthy of freedom, she said bitterly. Once I was more than this, but they feared me, feared what I could become. Her voice trembled, but there was fire beneath it. For the first time, John saw more than sorrow in her. He saw anger, a buried storm behind her glowing eyes. He wanted to ask more, but the ground beneath them rumbled. The sound of distant steps echoed through the tunnels, heavy and inhuman. The woman pulled against her chains in panic. You must go now. But John did not move. He could not turn back now, not after what he had seen. Instead, he scanned the walls, noticing strange markings carved into the stone, symbols glowing faintly, written in a language he could not understand. They circled her like a cage within a cage. The prison was not only chains, it was magical and binding. What do these symbols mean? John asked, touching one carefully. The moment his fingers brushed it, pain shot through his hand like fire. He hissed, pulling back, his skin burned as if by acid. The woman shook her head. You see now. This place rejects you, human, just as they reject me. Her voice dropped to a whisper. They built this prison so that even the stars could not hear my cry. The footsteps grew louder, closer. Shadows flickered at the mouth of the cave. John's instincts screamed at him to run, but his heart would not allow it. Instead, he turned back to her, his voice low but fierce. Tell me your name, he demanded. For a moment, she was silent, then finally whispered, Lyra. The name felt heavy in the air, like it carried a history of pain and power. Before John could speak again, dark figures entered the cave. 3 tall aliens with armor carved from black stone, their eyes glowing like fire. They carried long spears humming with strange energy. The leader's voice was deep and cruel. Human, you should not have come here. John tightened his fists, but he was outnumbered. The guards sneered, their eyes filled with hatred. She is not for you, one of them said, pointing at Lyra. She is the cursed one, the shame of our kind, and you will not touch her. Lyra lowered her head, her chains rattling, shame filling her voice. Leave him alone. Please, he knows nothing, she begged. But John refused to stay silent. She is not cursed, he shouted. She is a prisoner of your lies. The guards roared with anger, rushing toward him. John dodged the first strike, his explorer training keeping him alive. But he was only human, and their strength was far greater. One blow knocked him to the ground, the spear tip pressed against his chest. End him, the leader growled, raising his weapon high. But before the strike fell, Lyra screamed. It was not a normal scream. It was powerful, filled with pain and fury. The entire cave shook, the symbols on the walls flaring with light. The guards staggered, clutching their heads. John stared in shock as Lyra's eyes burned brighter than stars. "Enough," she whispered, her voice trembling but strong. The guards snarled, but they hesitated, fear flickering in their eyes. Even they were not untouched by her power. The leader spat on the ground, glaring at John. "This is your only warning, human," he hissed. "Return to your world and forget what you saw here, or your bones will lie with hers." With that, they stepped back into the shadows, their footsteps fading into silence. The cave was still again, but the air carried the echo of danger. John rose slowly, his chest aching, but his spirit unbroken. He looked at Lyra, who collapsed weakly against her chains, her energy spent. "You see now," she whispered softly, "this is the prison I live in, not just the chains, but their hatred, their fear." John's hands shook, but he placed them gently against the glowing cuffs. "I don't care what they say," he whispered. "I will find a way to free you." Lyra lifted her head, her eyes wide with disbelief. No one had ever spoken to her like that, not in all her years of pain. Her lips trembled, and for the first time, a spark of hope flickered inside her. "Then you are even more foolish than I thought," she whispered. But her voice carried a warmth that had not been there before. The cave returned to silence, but everything had changed. The human had seen the prison for what it was, and the prisoner, long forgotten, had seen a light she thought was lost forever. The secret was out, and nothing would ever be the same again. The cave was heavy with silence after the guards left. John could still hear their words echoing in his mind, sharp and cruel. But more than their threats, it was Lyra's scream that stayed with him. The power in her voice had shaken the cave itself, had bent the air around them. It was not the sound of weakness. It was the sound of something hidden, something they wanted to bury. Lyra's head rested against the wall, her breathing weak, her glowing eyes dimmed, her chains pulsing faintly with energy. John knelt beside her, speaking softly. "You're stronger than they believe." But she shook her head, bitter sadness curling around her words. "You don't understand. Human, my strength is the very reason I am here." She hesitated, her lips trembling. For years, she had kept her story locked inside, sealed by fear and shame. But something about this human, the way he did not turn away, the way he spoke without fear, broke the silence within her. She turned slightly, her eyes half-hidden, her whisper carrying a weight far older than John could imagine. "There was a time when I was not a prisoner. I was a daughter of the High Council, the blood of the royal line." John's eyes widened, surprise flashing across his face. "You were royalty?" he asked carefully. Lyra laughed softly, but the sound was filled with sorrow. "Yes, and no, I was a princess in name, but in truth, I was their greatest threat." Her chains rattled softly as she leaned back, her voice low and trembling. "They feared me because of my eyes, not because of what you saw today, but because of what I might see." John frowned. "What you might see?" Lyra's glowing eyes flickered, and for a moment, John felt something press against his thoughts, like a door knocking from the other side. "My gift is not only to show fear, but to see the hidden truths in others," she confessed. "I can look into a soul and uncover its secrets, its lies, its deepest desire." Her words struck John like a blade. If what she said was true, then her people had reason to fear. A ruler who could see through lies, who could expose corruption, who could never be deceived, such a person was more dangerous than any weapon. "They called me cursed because I uncovered the darkness in their hearts," Lyra continued bitterly. "I revealed secrets they wanted buried. I saw betrayals before they could be carried out. I saw greed and cruelty in those who claimed to be pure." Her voice cracked, pain filling every word. "And for that, they chained me here, not because I was cursed, but because I was inconvenient." The cave seemed colder, darker, as her truth filled the air. John's fists clenched, anger rising inside him. "They lied to their people, didn't they? They told them you were a monster, when all you did was reveal their corruption." Lyra turned her face away, but her silence was an answer. For the first time since meeting her, John understood the depth of her prison. She was not only chained in body, but in memory, her story rewritten, her name turned into a warning. Don't stare at her, they must have told their children. Don't meet her gaze, or you will be cursed. And so, an entire world had turned its back on her, believing lies that kept power in the hands of the cruel. John felt his chest burn with rage, but also with a strange determination. He looked at her, his voice steady. Then I will be the one to see you as you are, not as they say you are. Lyra's lips trembled, her eyes glistening. You will regret that. Human, everyone who looked too long has. But John shook his head firmly. I'm not like them. I won't turn away. The cave flickered with faint light, as if reacting to his words. Lyra's chains glowed brighter for a moment, humming with strange energy. She gasped softly, her hand gripping the stone wall. What are you doing? She whispered. John touched the symbols on the wall again, though pain shot through him. He gritted his teeth, refusing to pull back. Maybe your prison is strong, he said through the pain, but no cage lasts forever. Lyra stared at him, a storm in her eyes. For years she had believed no one would ever come. No one would ever risk themselves for her. But this human, foolish and fragile, stood against the very chains of her world. And something inside her heart shifted. A spark she had thought long dead began to stir. Her whisper came again, soft and filled with fear, but this time with something else too. Don't stare at me, human. I can't bear it, she said. The hours inside the cave stretched like days. John stayed near Lyra, even when the silence between them was heavy. She had told him truths that no one else had ever dared to speak aloud. Her curse was not a curse at all, but a gift her people feared. And though the truth weighed on her like stone, for the first time she had spoken it to someone who listened. John brought small supplies from his pack, water, a bit of food, a thin blanket he carried for survival. He placed them near her, but Lyra hesitated, her hands trembling as she reached. She was not used to kindness, not after years of chains and cruel words. You don't need to do this, she whispered, her voice filled with doubt. But John smiled faintly. I know, but I want to. At first, Lyra kept her distance, her head bowed, her eyes hidden. Every time John tried to speak, she gave short answers, as if afraid to say too much. But slowly, as the hours passed, her words grew longer. She began to tell him about her world, how once the sky was filled with floating cities, how her people could bend energy into living light. Her voice carried pride, but also grief, for all of it had been taken from her the moment she was declared cursed. John listened without interruption, his gaze steady and patient. She risked small glances at him, testing, waiting for the moment he would flinch or turn away. But he never did. Even when her glowing eyes met his, he held her gaze, his mind bracing for the visions. Sometimes shadows flickered in the corners of his thoughts, but he pushed them aside, choosing instead to focus on her words. It confused her, it frightened her, and it warmed her all at once. One night, as the cave grew colder, Lyra whispered, Why? Why do you stay? You're not bound here like I am. John looked at her carefully, his voice quiet but firm. Because no one deserves to be alone forever. Her chains rattled softly as she shifted, the weight of those words pressing against the walls of her heart. Alone, that was all she had ever been, even when surrounded by her own people. As days passed, their bond deepened. John began to notice things others had ignored. How Lyra hummed softly when she thought he slept, how her chains glowed brighter when she felt strong emotion. He even caught her laughing once, a sound so fragile and unexpected it nearly broke him. It was not the laugh of a cursed being, but of a woman who had once known joy. And in that sound, John felt something inside him shift. Yet, danger never left them. The guards returned often, their eyes suspicious, their threats sharp. Each time they warned John, and each time he refused to leave. Lyra's heart ached with fear, torn between pushing him away and holding onto the one soul who saw her, as more than a prisoner. "You are reckless," she whispered once after the guards left. "You risk too much for me." John only smiled faintly. "Maybe, but some risks are worth it." Her hands tightened around her chains, her heart beating faster at his words. No one had ever spoken to her like that. Not with belief, not with trust. She wanted to fight it, to remind herself that hope was dangerous, that hope could be broken. But each day with him made the walls around her heart weaker. Every time he looked at her, not with fear, but with quiet strength, she felt herself changing. One evening, John sat close to her, his voice low. "What will you do if you are free?" Lyra froze, the question like a blade cutting through her silence. Her lips trembled. I don't know. I have been here so long. I almost forgot who I was outside these chains." John reached out slowly, his hand brushing against the cold metal of her cuffs. "Then maybe it's time to remember," he said softly. For the first time, she did not turn away from his gaze. Her glowing eyes met his fully, and though shadows flickered in the corners of his mind, he did not look away. Instead, he held her gaze, steady and unbroken. And in that silent exchange, something passed between them, something deeper than words. Trust, fragile but real, began to bloom. Her whisper came again, but this time it was different. "Don't stare at me, human. I can't bear it," she said, her voice trembling. But John heard the change. She was not asking him to turn away. She was asking him not to leave, not to abandon the fragile bond that had begun to form. And with quiet certainty, John whispered back, "Then I won't." In the cold silence of the cave, among chains and shadows, a bond was born. It was fragile, it was dangerous, but it was alive. And for Lyra, who had lived only with fear, it felt like the first spark of freedom. For John, it was the beginning of something far greater than exploration. It was the discovery of a soul worth fighting for. The bond between John and Lyra grew stronger with each passing day. But bonds are dangerous things in a place built on fear. The guards had grown restless, their eyes sharper every time they visited. Whispers spread among them that the human was more than a fool, that he was a threat. And threats, in their world, were not left alive for long. One night, the cave shook with heavy footsteps, louder and harsher than before. Lyra's chains pulsed, as if warning her of the danger approaching. She looked at John with fear in her eyes. "They come in numbers this time," she whispered. John gripped the small weapon he carried, though he knew it was little against their strength. Still, he refused to run, not while she was bound, not while she needed him. The guards stormed inside, 6 of them this time, their armor glowing with sharp lines of red energy. Their leader raised his spear and pointed at John. "You were warned, human. Now you will pay with your life." John stepped forward, his body tense, his eyes steady. "If you want me, then take me," he said, "but leave her." The guards laughed, their cruel voices echoing. "She is cursed. She is nothing, and you are less than nothing for choosing her." Lyra's heart pounded, anger rising like fire in her chest. For years she had stayed silent, endured chains and shame. But watching them raise their weapons at John filled her with something she had almost forgotten: defiance. "No," she whispered, her voice trembling but fierce. The guards turned to her, mocking. "No? You do not command here, cursed one." Then the cave exploded into chaos. The first guard lunged at John, spear aimed at his chest. John dodged, rolling across the ground, his blade flashing as he struck. The weapon bit into alien armor, but barely scratched it. The guard snarled, swinging his weapon, and John barely blocked in time. The clash rang through the cave, sparks flying. Another guard struck from behind, but Lyra screamed, her eyes blazing. The sound froze the warrior mid-step, shadows curling around him. He dropped his spear, clutching his head as visions clawed at his mind. John took the chance, slamming his weapon into the guard's chest, sending him crashing into the wall. But the others were not so easily stopped. The leader charged forward, his spear glowing bright with deadly energy. John braced himself, but the strike came too fast, too strong. The weapon cut across his side, burning through cloth and skin. He cried out, falling to one knee, blood staining the cave floor. Lyra's chains rattled as she pulled desperately, her voice breaking. "Stop! Leave him," she cried. But the guards only laughed. "Watch him die. Cursed one. Watch the only fool who believe in you fall." Tears burned in her glowing eyes, but then something inside her broke free. Her chains blazed with light, the ancient symbols on the walls flickering as if they could no longer contain her. A surge of power rippled through the cave, shaking stone loose from the ceiling. The guards staggered, their eyes wide. "Impossible!" The leader gasped. "She cannot." But she could. Lyra's scream split the air, not of fear, but of fury. Her eyes shone brighter than stars, and shadows leapt from her gaze, twisting and wrapping around the guards. They shouted in panic, dropping their weapons as the visions consumed them. John, weak and bleeding, looked up in awe. She was no longer the broken prisoner he had first seen. She was something greater, something terrifying, and something beautiful. The guards collapsed one by one, their minds shattered by the storm of visions. The leader alone remained, trembling as he tried to stand. You are the doom of us all," he spat, before fleeing into the darkness of the cave. The others lay unconscious, their armor cracked, their spears shattered. The cave was silent again, but not the same. The chains that held Lyra flickered weakly, as though her power had shaken them to their core. John dragged himself closer, clutching his wound. Lyra turned to him, her voice shaking. "Why did you not leave? You could have lived." John smiled faintly through the pain. "Because your life matters more than mine." Her hands trembled, reaching toward him, though her chains still held her back. "No one has ever said that to me," she whispered, her voice breaking. Her glowing eyes softened, filled not with fear, but with something fragile, something new. She looked down at him, her whisper trembling in the cold air. "Don't stare at me, human. I can't bear it," she said again. But this time, it was not a warning, it was a confession. She was afraid, not of curses, but of the bond growing between them. And John, bleeding but unbroken, whispered back, "Then I'll keep looking until you believe me." The cave walls glowed faintly, as though even the prison itself had heard his words. The enemy had struck, but the battle had revealed something deeper. Lyra was no longer only a prisoner, and John was no longer only a fool. Together, they had become something their enemies feared most. Hope. The cave smelled of smoke and iron after the battle. Shattered weapons lay across the ground, and the groans of fallen guards echoed faintly. John leaned against the wall, his hand pressed to his bleeding side. Pain blurred his vision, but he kept his gaze fixed on Lyra. Her eyes still glowed, softer now, but filled with a light he had never seen before. For the first time, she looked less like a prisoner and more like a queen. Her chains still bound her, but they trembled as though they feared her strength. John whispered weakly, "You saved me." Lyra shook her head, her voice breaking. "No, you saved me first, human. You saw me when no one else dared to." She pulled at her chains, her arms trembling with effort. The cuffs glowed angrily, fighting against her power. John forced himself to his feet, staggering toward her. Every step felt like fire through his body, but he did not stop. His hand reached for the glowing symbols on the wall, the ones he had touched before. This time, he did not pull away from the pain. The fire burned into his skin, but he pushed harder. "John, stop!" Lyra cried. "It will kill you." He gritted his teeth, his voice harsh. "Then let it, if it means freeing you." The symbols flared, the cave shaking as energy rippled across the stone. The chains screamed with light, resisting, but the cracks began to form. Lyra gasped, watching as the prison that had held her for years started to weaken. Then, in the chaos, a truth fell from her lips, one she had buried for too long. "They lied to you, John. They lied to everyone," she whispered fiercely. "My eyes are not cursed. They never were. The visions I showed you, they were not meant to harm. They were meant to reveal. John froze, his hand still burning against the wall. "What do you mean?" he asked through clenched teeth. Lyra's voice grew steadier, her chains rattling. "My gift is not a curse. It is sight, true sight. When I look into a soul, I reveal what is hidden, fear, desire, truth, lies, all of it." Her lips curled in bitterness. "They called it a curse because they were afraid of me, afraid I would expose their cruelty, afraid I would show the world what kind of monsters ruled it." John's eyes widened, realization crashing over him. "All this time, they chained you not because you were dangerous, but because you could see the truth." Lyra nodded, tears shimmering in her glowing eyes. "Yes, they feared me, not because I could hurt them, but because I could unmask them." The last symbol flared under John's hand, light bursting like fire. The chains cracked, shattering with a scream that echoed through the cave. Lyra stumbled forward, free for the first time in years. She fell to her knees, gasping as though the very air tasted new. Her hands touched the ground, unchained, trembling with freedom. John collapsed beside her, his strength nearly gone. Lyra caught him, holding his weight, her glowing eyes wide with fear. "Stay with me," she begged. "You cannot fall now, not after everything." John smiled faintly, blood staining his lips. "I told you, Lyra. I won't look away." She pressed her forehead to his, her voice trembling. "You are a fool, human, but you are my fool." The air around them shifted, the cave glowing faintly with soft light. It was as if the prison itself acknowledged the truth at last. Lyra was no longer the cursed prisoner. She was the silenced heir, the rightful daughter of power. She rose slowly, helping John to his feet. Her eyes blazed with new fire, not of fear, but of purpose. "They tried to bury me," she whispered, "but they forgot one thing. Truth cannot be chained forever." John leaned against her, his voice weak but steady. "Then let's show them." For the first time in years, Lyra stepped out of her circle of chains. Her feet touched free ground, and her heart beat with something she thought she had lost: hope. The revelation had come, sharp and undeniable. She was not cursed, she was chosen. And beside her stood the one soul brave enough to see her for who she truly was. The cave that had once been a prison now stood silent. Broken chains lay scattered on the floor, their glow fading like dying stars. Lyra stood in the center, her body trembling, her chest rising and falling as if she had just taken her first true breath. John leaned weakly against her, his side bleeding but his spirit unbroken. Together, they stepped into a freedom that had been denied for far too long. Outside, the alien sky shimmered with strange light. For years, Lyra had only seen it through cracks of stone and shadows. Now it stretched endlessly above her, wide and alive. Her glowing eyes reflected the colors, and for the first time, she did not look away. John watched her, his voice low. "It suits you." She turned to him, her lips trembling. "Freedom feels heavier than I thought." But they both knew the danger was not gone. The guards would return, and this time not with 6, but with armies. The council would never allow her release to remain hidden. Lyra clenched her fists, her power stirring around her like a storm. "They will hunt us. They will call me a curse again," she whispered. John smiled faintly. "Then let them, because I know the truth now, and so will others." They moved together through the valley. John stepped slow but steady, Lyra supporting him. Every shadow felt dangerous. Every gust of wind carried the memory of enemies. Yet in their silence there was strength, a bond forged in pain and defiance. When they reached a ridge, Lyra paused, her eyes scanning the horizon. Cities shimmered in the distance, floating above the clouds like islands of light. Her home, her prison, her enemy. "I was meant to rule with them," she whispered, her voice bitter. "But I will not return as their prisoner. I will return as their truth." John's hand touched hers, warm despite his wound. "And I'll be beside you," he said softly, Her lips curved in the faintest smile, fragile but real. Night fell, and they found shelter among the rocks. John's strength was fading, his face pale. Lyra knelt beside him, her glowing eyes full of fear. "You gave too much," she whispered. "You burned yourself to break my chains." He chuckled weakly. "Worth it." Tears filled her eyes, the kind she had buried for years. "You should not care so much for someone like me," she said, her voice breaking. John looked at her firmly. "Even through the pain? I don't care who you were, Lyra. I care who you are." Her heart trembled, for no one had ever spoken those words to her. In that fragile moment, her hand brushed against his cheek. Her whisper came again, the words that had haunted her since the day they met. "Don't stare at me, human. I can't bear it." But this time, the meaning was different. Her voice shook not with fear, but with the weight of something deeper. She was not afraid he would see a curse. She was afraid he would see her heart. John's voice was soft but unyielding. "Then I'll never look away, not now, not ever." The air between them grew still, the stars above glowing brighter. It felt as if the universe itself paused, listening. Lyra lowered her head, her lips close to his ear, and whispered, "Then maybe, I don't want you to look away." The bond that had begun in chains now burned like fire. No longer fragile, no longer hidden, but alive. They were no longer prisoner and fool, no longer alien and human. They were two souls standing against a world of lies. Together, they would face armies, councils, and fear itself. For truth was a weapon greater than any chain. The night passed, and dawn painted the sky in gold. Lyra rose, her eyes shining not with sorrow, but with resolve. She looked toward the cities in the distance, her voice steady. "They wanted silence, but they will hear my voice again." John leaned on her for strength, his smile faint but full of trust. "And I'll make sure they listen," he said. For the first time in her life, Lyra felt the weight of hope in her chest. It was terrifying, it was dangerous, but it was real. And as she stood beside the human who refused to leave her, she knew her journey was only beginning. The cave no longer defined her. The chains no longer bound her. Her whisper carried into the rising sun, not of fear, but of promise. "Don't stare at me, human. I can't bear it," she whispered. But this time her words carried a different truth. Because deep inside, she knew she never wanted him to look away again.